Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons. I've got this feeling.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the D's have notched up their 9th win on the trot, wins that have been bookended by victories against the Suns. In fact, since round 17 of the shortened 2020 season, we've won 21, lost 4 and drawn 1 from 26 matches. We are truly living through a golden age. What a time to be alive. Joining me tonight, veteran Demonlander, fresh off the plane from Queensland, George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Binman. Good evening, listeners. And hopefully tonight we can provide a more entertaining program than the federal government budget analysis, which is going on at this very moment.
Well, hopefully we don't put anyone to sleep tonight, and for those listening in the car especially. Also joining us tonight, unfortunately still watching the Demons from his couch, Bin Man. Welcome, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And that surprises me, George. I would have thought with your love of Melbourne finances, this would be like one of the big nights in the George household is budget night.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I haven't heard any news in the budget about a training facility financing, so I've come to do this instead.
Right. Any news on the federal government promising some money for the social facility for us?
No, nothing whatsoever. So yeah. We'll stay away from that. Let's talk demon stuff.
Yeah, well, let's get straight into that. I was fortunate enough to head up to the Gold Coast on a rescue mission to retrieve my car. Coincidentally, on the same weekend the D's were playing up there. Well, that's the way I sold it to my wife. I arrived on Friday evening to torrential rain with a forecast of thunderstorms on my phone app for the next day. Saturday arrived, and the morning it was absolutely glorious sunshine, as you would expect from the Gold Coast. But as the afternoon wore on, it became more and more overcast, and it did look ominous. But the rain never came, which was great for us. It still was a very hot and humid night, and after the match I did go on the ground, and we'll talk about it later, it was quite wet, the deck. Must have been from the day before as well. But pre-match, I went to the Queensland Demons function, and once again I was lucky enough to touch and have a photo with the 2021 Premiership Cup, and that's my 4th or 5th time touching the Holy Grail. And it never gets old. The smile on my face could power a small factory every time I have a photo with that beautiful piece of silverware. And I think the club's doing a fantastic job of ensuring that as many supporters as possible all around the country get their hands on it. So look out for it as the D's travel interstate, because I believe they're going to be taking it with them all over the country this year. So that's a great thing. Get a photo with it while it lasts. The match itself, in general terms, I really felt worried during the match, even when they kicked the first few goals. It's no secret that the Suns play their best footy in the first few weeks of the season. They've got a few very talented young guns in the team, but on the whole, they don't really have the arsenal all around the ground to stop a team that's as well drilled as ours. Once we got the lead and we were 14 points up, we'd get to 20 or 26 points up, and I was expecting us to steamroll them from that point, but they always just seemed to get 1 or 2 goals back, and then we'd get 1 or 2 back. And then in the end, if not for our wayward kicking for goal in the last, we probably would have steamrolled them. And in the end, I reckon the scoreboard flattered them a little. And as I mentioned, you might have noticed that our skills looked a little bit sloppy, and you're probably scratching your head watching at home because the conditions looked perfect, but it was very hot and humid, and due to the downpour the day before, that surface was very wet. As I said, putting my hand on the ground at the end of the game, you could feel in the dirt and the grass how wet it actually was. So that definitely contributed to some of the sloppy skills of the night. I was never really nervous that we'd let the game slip from us. And I know I mentioned this last week, but the old Melbourne probably would have. Remember that game where we just stole it in the last second? And as I said last week, we've really, meaning I've got to stop comparing this Melbourne side to any Melbourne side of the past, because it's a different beast. And speaking of beasts, Christian Petracca, he just keeps going from strength to strength. He's unbelievable to watch. Such explosive pace and lateral movement through and out of a pack. He had a PB for number of possessions after the match. He was listed as having 41 possessions, but the mongrels robbed him of a stat once again. He's ended up with 40 possessions, 17 contested, 6 clearances, 8 score involvements, 14 inside 50s. That's incredible. 780 metres gain, and the wayward kicking with 2 behinds. Before you guys go on, I'll just say that his last 5 matches have been incredible. From the qualifying final to this week, he's had 30 possessions, 2 goals. Preliminary final 32 and 1 goal, grand final 39 and 2, round 1 38 and 2, round 2 40 and the 2 behinds that I mentioned. That's just an incredible run of games. Any general comments? But B-Man, maybe you want to jump in before George takes us on a deep dive of our tactics that helped us secure the victory over the Suns.
Yeah, it was interesting that you both went, and there was a bit of discussion on Demonland, and I will sort of touch it on it. George will touch on a bit now in terms of that discussion about the lead. But, it looked, to my eye afterwards, and when the players were interviewed, and, just in that last quarter, they looked absolutely spent, or both players from both teams. So I was curious, really, both your sort of sense of actually how hot it was up there, how humid. And the other thing, just as a sort of aside, or 2 other things, is one, there was a bit of talk about how many Demon fans there. There's talk that was 70, 80% Demon fans, 80-20. But just before, while I think of it, Andy, we didn't talk much about track or Oliver last week. And I think George noted how fantastic it is that you could go through a sort of a review of a match and not highlight their gains. But you're totally spot on to highlight track's game. In the call of the game, they when he was at 14, I think he was 14 inside 50s with about 15 minutes to go, and they said the record was 16 inside 50s. So he was Monty, I thought, at that point to get that record. But he was phenomenal, and his ability to get through traffic and his agility is extraordinary, isn't it? And he really sort of powered through. And for a big power athlete like him to play that sort of game in that sort of sapping heat and humidity, it was just incredible. It was sort of a testament to his fitness that it hasn't dropped off. And I'm just curious, really, what your sense at the ground was, both in terms of the atmosphere of Melbourne fan, but in particular, I'm interested in sort of actually how humid and sort of draining that heat was.
I'll let George answer in a second. For me, it was very hot. I mean, I had a scarf around my neck, so that didn't help. But it was very hot. I was sweating. I had a t-shirt and shorts on. It was hot, George.
Yeah, the temperature was probably very, very pleasant, and it feels that way, except that it was so humid, and you get no sense of that on the television. The ball was like a cake of soap. And I think the statistics actually from the game proved that it wasn't a game for big men, with the exceptions of Casbolt and Jackson. Not many others could mark it during the night. I think Max Gawn had 2 marks for the night, one of which was definitely a chest mark. Ben Brown had 2, T-Mac had 2. The ball just wouldn't stick in hands. It was just as slippery. So it's really hard for people to appreciate how sapping that sort of humidity is. And I hope that it doesn't really affect the side when they've got to play this week, because it really took it out of both sides. The ball was just certainly in that last quarter, and the third quarter had substantial amounts of it as well, where the ball just couldn't be moved from one portion of the ground to the other, because both sides were completely and utterly sapped, quite literally, to run a more entertaining game. But I think that was also part of our plan, and we'll talk about that shortly as well.
And just before you do, George, just as a general comment about the game is, I actually thought it was a fantastic game of footy, and I guess we'll touch on it through the show. But I was really impressed with the Suns. I thought the Dew did a great job of coaching, and they I think they've got some real strengths, and I thought they played really well. So, my sense is that as the season wears on, that win will look like a pretty good win, because I know that they historically, it's been noted a few times that they start well in the season and they've got a good record. Not so much last year, but previous, they've won 3 out of their first 4 or things like that. But I thought they were super impressive, and I thought it was a good game of footy, really good game of footy to watch, and I was really, really pleased with the win.
Yeah,
I think we'll get a.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I think we'll get a really good idea of the Suns because they're playing GWS this week. I think that'll really tell you where they stand on the ladder, given where GWS finished last year. So, I think they'll really challenge a lot of sides.
And you add King into that team, and obviously he's not going to be there this season, but he definitely will add a lot to that team.
And losing Rankin.
Yes.
I'm actually sure how late in the day he came out, but I thought it must have been between when the selection was made. He wasn't selected, was he? Sorry, he was selected.
He was selected, yes.
Yeah, so in those sorts of conditions, he would have made a difference in terms of those ground ball gets, and particularly because that's an area of the sort of defence that stretches us a bit with those mid-side forwards. So, they were impressive, I thought.
Let's move on. George, you were going to give us a bit of a deep dive into the tactics that got us the win.
Yeah, we've just spoken about the weather conditions and the game conditions and the conditions on the ground. It was absolutely, utterly critical that the rotations for the team were well managed. And I think this was, again, we talked about this last year. We've got a number of players who play a lot of time on the ground, and the advantage of that is it enables others to get more rotations. There's a limit of 75 rotations onto the field. So, for example, in this match, we had Langdon, May and Tomlinson all played 100% game time in those conditions. More importantly, the Suns had similar sorts of percentages in terms of who was playing on the ground. But the important thing is that it enables someone, let's create an example. Someone like Petracca can get an extra rotation or an extra rotation or two because these guys are actually staying on the ground. And instead of being a single rotation that might be for 5 minutes, he can do 2 of 2.5 minutes. So you see people like Petracca and Oliver getting a quick short rest where normally they wouldn't get one. The Suns, on the other hand, particularly in the rucking area, Witch was on the ground for 76% of the time, which means he was off the ground if you say the game's 100 minutes, and while this isn't a perfect piece of arithmetic, Witch was spending his time off the ground, whereas Gawn and Jackson were spending their time on the ground in the forward line. So what happened was that Chol had to leave their forward line and move into the ruck and play those extra minutes, whereas our 2 ruckmen were effectively assisting the rotations policy. And at the end of the day, that in a game that is so exacting and so draining, that makes the difference. That Petracca's still running in the last quarter, and people like Rail and Anderson, can barely get a trot up around them, sort of thing. So I think that our rotations is something very critical, particularly in these sort of games. I think we'll see a few other players when we come back down to Melbourne this week probably stay longer on the ground as well. So it's a really nice little 1%er that we get, but I think it ultimately pays out in the end.
Just on that, George, Tomlinson noted that. I saw a post-match interview with him out in the from the rooms, and he made the point that he was on the ground for 100% of the time. Noted the heat as well, and he made that exact point that by him doing that, it gives other players the opportunity to get a chop out. And it's something, as you say, that was a a really important part of our system last year, wasn't it? In terms of also being able to use players in bursts, and some of those younger players only getting 50-60% of time. So
yeah. The other piece of tactical nous I think that we used in the game, and I'm afraid the Melbourne supporters are going to have to get used to this. Binman spoke about it, particularly towards the end of last year, was the ability that we and the tactical methods that we employ to just shut a game down once we get in front. We were behind that short period in the first quarter, dragged it back, ground them down. Second quarter opened up that lead, and basically the game stayed where it was, that 2 to 3 goal margin for the rest of the game. This reminds me very heavily of Paul Roos when he was at Sydney. Once they got in front, they never ever conceded to the opposition, and we're doing exactly the same thing. You could see it at the ground with the way players were being positioned, particularly on the wings. They would take the defensive side. In the event that the Suns got the ball out, you actually had an extra 2 players down in the defending line very, very quickly. Goodwin, in his post-match interview, made the point when one of the reporters asked him about our inability to kick goals. He simply said, we didn't need to kick goals, and that proved to be the case in the end. I think, unfortunately, what we're going to see is more of this during the season, where we will win games simply to win games, and you won't see too many blowouts like we saw in the grand final. It may not be entertaining to watch, but you're going to see the wins just amass during the season.
It's really interesting, George. Yeah, you sort of picked up on that's what you chose to focus on this week, because I was reflecting on that comment from Goodwin in the sense that it was unusually sort of honest is maybe the one word, but like, in a way that he spoke to our philosophy of, of not needing to score is holding the opposition from scoring. And I think, when we talk about other sides, and I'll talk a bit about Essendon a bit later, but that's something that sort of makes us distinct from other teams. Our sort of a key strategy. I mean, all teams are trying to stop other teams scoring, but we make it an offensive weapon almost to reduce their ability to do so. And so I had a couple of sort of thoughts about that. One of which was that I'm really sort of, my sense is the big driver in that last quarter was one, that's what our strategy is in any case. But I think with that humidity that you guys talked about and how draining it was, that, with the 6-day break coming in into next week's game, is that it was prudent to do that. Like, why keep going? But if you go back to the first quarter, what was really, I was struck by how we played in that first quarter, because, as we've talked about often enough, we're so predictable in our patterns and the way we move. We were unusually aggressive with our ball movement in that first 20 minutes of the first quarter. If you go back and look at the replay, there was a number of examples where we went through the corridor and it just reminded me, how infrequently we do that. And one of the more striking things was May going up the centre with his kicks from kick out rather than to that left-hand side. And my theory was, perhaps you could think, well, we weren't switched on, or we were looking to, experiment. I think more likely is that we were looking to steal a break early in the game, and then we were going to do exactly what we ended up doing, that you're saying, I think you're accurately saying, is go into control mode, tempo mode in that last quarter. I think the strategy was to get a 4-5 goal early lead and hold it for the whole match. And there was talk on the telecast that the rain was due to come at halftime. So I feel like that their thinking was, maybe if we can get an early jump on them and then hold them, rain will come, we'll hold that match, that lead for the rest of the match. Because it was really, I found it really striking, their sort of how unusual it was, how aggressive they were. Again, I think it's interesting watching other teams sort of try variations on how we play. Is the problem with that model is you turn it over and you score, and within a short period of time they were up to a 15-point lead and easily could have been 3-4 goals, and almost all of that lead was based around turnovers or us being aggressive in the middle, turning it over in a low percentage spot to turn it over. And that sort of really flagged too, is it was unusual. We don't play like that. We play the percentages down the wing. And then as soon as they got out to that 15-point lead, we reverted on field and went back to how we normally play and didn't make an aggressive move for the rest of the match. Basically, all down the line, no real risky kicks to the corridor. And as you perfectly, correctly say, they sort of grounded out, didn't we? In terms of the scoring, it was interesting, that low scoring. I had a mate who, in terms of the margin and not scoring much in the last quarter, he said in the press batch conference, as you say, that he talked about that we didn't need to score, but he also said that we weren't tired. And I reckon that was a little bit disingenuous in the sense that maybe he didn't want to give Essendon the sort of, any ammunition whatsoever to acknowledge that the players were tired. But to my eye, they're not. They would be robots if they weren't tired because it was so humid. But my mate made the point that just after the beginning of the third quarter, we were 10-1. And then we reverted to type and ended up and finished the match 12-10. And at least 3 of those 5 points in the last were pretty easy shots. And in the second half, we actually had more scoring shots, 12-10. So, my mate was saying is sort of that notion that good conversion is often interpreted as playing well and bad conversion playing badly, but it's small margins, isn't it? We could have easily won that game by 4 or 5 goals, and there would be no talk at all about the fact that the margin was pretty. It was only in the end 13 points, wasn't it? So again, bad kicking was bad football.
If you would like to join the show tonight, give us a call 0390163666. That's 0390163666, or you can Skype us at Demonland31. You can also head down to our chat room, demonland.com/podcast. Each week we'll be looking at some positives, whether they be team or individuals, and also areas where we possibly need some improvement. And I'll kick off the positives. I don't think we can look past our dual rising star nominee in Jake Bowey. I talked about our 9-game winning streak in my intro, and this little dynamo has ridden the wave from go to woe. He had a personal best game consisting of an incredible 34 possessions, 18 contested, 16 intercepts, 9 marks, 572 metres gained, all at just under 80% disposal efficiency from only 72% game time, which is incredible as well. This is his second, his third game. He was a Rising Star nomination. His 7th game was the Premiership, and his 9th game is his second Rising Star nomination. Last week, I was lamenting the fact that nobody can replace the class and poise of Christian Salem. And while that still may be true, I think we're well on our way of unearthing another gem, and he's a handy backup he'll learn from the likes of someone like Salem. There are a lot of comparisons that can be made with like Caleb Daniels, and I think that's spot on, and he may even be better than Caleb Daniels, particularly because he's only played 9 games. Wrapped with that. Thoughts on Jake Bowey?
I thought he was brilliant, and in a really important part of the win. Actually, I thought what I really liked about him, apart from all of the things you pointed out and his poise and calmness, is that they really got into him. And in fact, I don't know what the feeling was for you guys watching live, but the Suns, it was interesting. The Suns came out and deliberately had tactics to upset us and to get into us and niggle. And there was a lot of byplay between Rao and again, I'm not sure if you guys noticed this at the ground, but coming off at each of the quarter breaks, and in particularly the end of the first quarter, there was a lot of talk between the two teams. And, I'd love to have been in the middle of it and hearing what they were saying. And they got stuck into Bowey a fair bit. And he stood up for himself. He didn't get knocked around, like he refused to sort of back down. I've noticed that before, but I sort of had a new appreciation for his toughness, actually. I thought he was really tough. He went back with a flight a couple of times. He was in and under, and they looked to stretch him. And I think it made sense to, because without Salem, as you say, he becomes a key player in terms of his ability to distribute. So I think the ability to play in the absence of Salem, and also play to that level, play such a key role, and take that sort of physical buffering was a real sign of a player who's not only got the skills, but he's also got that competitive mindset that you need to be a really, really good player. And that's something I love about Salem as well. So, I could not be more impressed with his game. And as I say, he was a really big influence on our ability to win that game, I thought.
It's the real pity for Bowey in this game was that this bloke called Petracca who was on the ground, because quite honestly, I thought Bowey's efforts were just as equal. He's played 9 games. It's not surprising the Suns tried to target him, but his poise and ability, like Salem, to seem to have that extra couple of seconds just to assess things, and he delivers the ball beautifully. I think he was disposal efficiency at 80% for the game. He is a real gem to have been found. I was really impressed. He's at the game. You're watching him, and he just reads the play so beautifully. And the team is very well placed with him in it, and he's not going anywhere out of the side in subsequent weeks when people like Lever and Salem and Hibbert become available.
No, I mean, he's like, it's remarkable, isn't it, how like his 9th game, how already he's a key part of that back six, and particularly with Hibbert not playing, with Lever not playing, with that with Rivers not playing up till this week, who he was down this week. We really needed a defender, and he's just it belies his age and experience, the way he's sort of how cool he is under pressure. And I think the other thing, George, that I really like about the way he plays is his decision making. He makes good decisions. So he's got the combination of good skills to execute, but it's the really good players have got both. They make sound decisions, and under pressure he makes good decisions and plays the percentages. He's a ripper, isn't he?
Yeah, George, you want to give your positive?
Well, we might as well continue on that line since we're talking about the back line, because once again, I was really, really impressed with the defensive side of the team this week. The coach made a point about, I think they had 59 or 60 entries inside 50 for, I think it was 19 scoring shots in total for the Suns. So I'm just amazed that, if you'd said to us Lever and Hibbert and Rivers and Salem are going to be missing out of this defensive defensive team at the start of the season, you'd be horrified with the prospects. But Tomlinson and Smith and Bowey's picked up the game as well. There's been no change. It's just remarkable. They operate to a system. They back each other up. It is just remarkable to watch. May was particularly, he was quite often the man who basically held the fort right at the very end, because Kaz Bolt in particular is a very good mark, and so was Chol when he was down there. May held them out time and time again, but Smith and Tomlinson were fantastic in the way that they slotted in to assist, and it has just been remarkable how well they all gel together. We've lost nothing as a result of these injured players, so. Full credit to Troy Chaplin as the defensive coach, because they are doing brilliantly with the way things are working down there.
Big man, you got a positive?
Yeah, 2 positives from a player's perspective is, I've talked a bit about both on the podcast and also sort of in chats on Demonland of Smith and Tomlinson competing for a spot potentially. Not, I don't think the same role, but my view is Smith's ahead, and I thought he had another good game. But my positive is Tomlinson. I thought he was terrific, and his mobility looked a bit better, but at one point he sort of turned and pivoted on his knee in the way that he did down in that game at Casey, Andy. But he looked a bit better. He took a really excellent, important mark going back with the flight of the ball. There wasn't someone behind him, but he really needed to mark it in slippery conditions, because if he didn't, it was one of those situations, one out, the ball would have been loose on the ground in their forward line. As he noted himself, and as I noted before, he played 100% game time. He kicked well. It was great to see him playing that role, and he's a reliable player. He's obviously a strong culture player as well. He's an important member of the club in terms of what he brings from a sort of good citizen culture perspective. So I was really, because I was thinking about, I'm comparing the two, and I've had Tomlinson out, and it was great to see him play well. I still of the view that probably Smith's ahead of him, but it's probably not a binary thing at the moment in terms of I've got a feeling Lever might be a couple of weeks away if they feel like they're playing a bit ducks and drakes with that. So he's in until Lever's back in at the very least. So I thought he was important, played a good game. My other positive was it's really interesting. I really like how good he is. He's so much more relaxed in those press conferences, and he's genuinely gives some insight, I think, about his sort of thinking. And the first player he commented on in the press conference was Cozzy, and his pressure was just fantastic. Again, on Demon Land, there's a lot of discussion often about T-Mac is in the frame at the moment. A lot of people are saying he's down, and I think that probably in our way we play, the key thing is role, and stats are less important. And you've just got to listen to Goody. He talks about it every single week, and which is why he made the point about Cozzy. He didn't talk about Cozzy's 2 goals. He talked about the pressure Cozzy applied. And I think that that's all you need to do, is that if you're in the side, you can be clear that you're playing, that Goody thinks they're playing their role. Otherwise, he won't select them. So I thought Cozzy's first half, even though he didn't have the same numbers, his pressure was fantastic. His second half was good as well. Leaving all that aside, the discussion about his pressure and what he brings to it and his role within the team, Cozzy I'm talking about, that goal he kicked was like, that's what you go to the footy for. That was something else. I'm not sure where you guys obviously were sitting in terms of relation to that, whether you're on the wings but the commentator, I forget which one of them said it, maybe it was Russell, but saying, that no, it was Brereton. He knocked the Suns player for not blocking him and getting his hand out. It was basically accusing the Suns player of a weak effort. But there's no way that Suns player, I forget who it was going to stop him. It was his sideways movement was so quick and so sharp. And then to be able to kick it from that angle, it was just as a standalone bit of footy, it was just magic, and one of the best goals. It's remarkable how little attention it's got. I thought, because it's one of the best goals I've seen from a Melbourne player in years. It was also a pretty crucial point of the game, because exactly as you're saying, George, is our methodology is to get a 3-4 goal lead, I should say, and then hold it. And that enabled it. That goal helped us get that lead. And then we were able to go into sort of tempo control mode. Just really fantastic to watch.
Could I just add a little bit more about Smith? At the ground, I was really, really impressed, because the conditions were slippery and difficult for marking. And he was pitted against Chol a lot of the time, who's a very, very good athlete at the very least. There were a couple of occasions where he wasn't able to mark the ball that came to ground, or he actually kicked it to the wrong person further up the field. And what really impressed me was the second efforts. When he failed to take a mark, he followed up and put in again and got possession back. When he kicked it to the opposition, I think it was in the second quarter, it came back and he tackled his opponent to regain it. So the second efforts were really, really telling. And I think that's the sort of thing that the coach wants, and that's the sort of thing that we're not seeing from a few other players who are playing in the VFL. So, all credit to him for that.
I remember exactly the one, because he really butchered the ball, didn't he, going forward? And it looked like his energy was to make up for immediately, and then he was lucky enough, I guess, to have that opportunity to do so. But it's really about mindset, because he did have the opportunity to impact the next contest, but if he wasn't thinking, I'm going to attack the next chance, he wouldn't have been ready to do so. And I think it speaks to a fella who's pretty hungry, isn't it? He's hungry for his spot. He's going to fight for it. He's looking more comfortable, and he's super athletic. There's no, obviously it's sort of a given, but I think it's well worth saying they love his pace, I'm sure, and his physical sort of ability to jump. He was wearing a brace on his hand,
Yeah.
I don't know whether he's got a wrist injury, but it looked like a huge guard.
It was shown in training vision during the week that they suspect he got a kick in it. I think it was that they said the previous week it might actually have been broken. You never know with these sort of things. But
He
Well,
does
it's
not have
remarkable that
any luck, this guy.
well, we played. So
yep,
the other interesting one, just on injuries, was Rivers looked pretty proppy right from the get-go, and he was strapped pretty heavily, and he came off at one point,
Yeah,
and he looked pretty distraught. I was really worried that he was like he'd done something, but he played out the game, which was another positive, because I was really worried we're going to lose him for a solid block of time.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think it was May or Tomlinson. It was interviewed about it, and they said something like he came back a bit early because we needed him. Into the side. But yeah, I was worried in that tackle because you can certainly see it on the replay. His knee was in not the best position when he was tackled. So it wasn't surprising when he hobbled off the ground, but glad that he came back on. So he might be one who may be rested this week as well when we get around to that point.
Yeah,
That was Steve. Sorry,
Yeah.
Andy, that was Steve May who said that. And I love Steve May's interviews because he's so relentlessly honest. But I thought it was a pretty curious thing to say that, bringing Rivers back, but maybe early. And I guess the thing about that was to get the structure right. So they weren't going to bring Hibbard back. I think he's going to, they'll probably take time to make sure his calf's right. But I think without Salem there, they were very keen to have a bit of their structure back, and Rivers is obviously a key player in terms of that consistent structure. So for me, it was almost a structural decision, and maybe they were prepared to take a bit of a risk. And as I said in my podcast last week, is he strikes me as the sort of player is that you want him playing footy, not sort of sitting around. Not like maybe Hibbert and more experienced players can manage time not in the team a bit better. He strikes me as a fella who needs to be playing footy, and so maybe that was part of their consideration.
Well, the week isn't over yet. There's always those mystery injuries of the week. Might wait till later in the week. Just a few extra stats on Tomlinson and Smith. Both of them had 7 spoils. Tomlinson's had 10 intercepts. He's taken 9 marks as well. So yeah, it was wrapped with his game. Let's move on to improvements, and mine's a bit of a cheat because it's sort of almost a positive, and it's not necessarily an improvement to an individual or on-field team-related aspect of our game. This is solely directed at whoever is in charge of the signing and re-signing of players. They've got to do every effort must be made to ensure that Luke Jackson is re-signed by the Melbourne Football Club. This kid is an out-and-out star of the game. One footy commentator on the radio the other day said that most ruckmen are just plotters, but not him. We've got the best number 1 ruckman, and we've got the current second best ruckman and future best ruckman in the league. He was just immense, particularly in the first half. He's the future of this club, and as he plays more and more game time in the ruck, and his and Max's roles and game time in the ruck and forward transition and sort of overlap, it's going to extend Max's career as well. Max is becoming a very handy goal-kicking forward. They've kicked 3 between them this week. They're going to monster teams together because you got, as you mentioned, the resting, how we rested them in the forward line. We can't match the Perth teams in terms of money and the lure of home, but surely the chance to be a part of a dynasty and learn at the feet of one of the greatest ruckmen of the modern era will be enough to keep Luke here, at least get him to sign a 2-year contract, and then we can deal with this all again in a few years. We simply can't go into 2023 without him in the team. I think he's extremely important to our ruck because we don't have another ruckman. So if we lose Luke, you saw what he did on the weekend. We want that in the
You're the master of the long bow there, Andy, because like under improvement. So I'm just walking that back a little bit. What was the actual improvement
The
that they
improvement
did?
is our I think it's Tim Lamb. He's got to improve because he's got to get this guy signed, and they've done a
Oh, yeah,
fantastic job of re-signing everyone. But this guy is the one to re-sign.
well, you haven't watched the replay yet, but if you do, Andy, Track is interviewed off the ground. He looks like he's, as I said before, he's totally spent. And Jackson's behind him waiting for his turn to be interviewed. And he says, Tim Lamb, come on, get him signed. So you're on the same page as Track. And he's a funny fella, Jackson. He's a big kid, really, isn't he? Sort of, he took it in the spirit it was intended. And my feeling is, that's because my natural optimism is that he'll extend for 2 years, because then he's going to be in a better shape in 2 years' time to make the deal, probably, and maybe have a shot at premiership. I mean, West Coast, Fremantle, both of those teams. I mean, West Coast is in a struggle town. Fremantle was not as impressive, certainly, as I was suggesting in the preseason preview. He could go back there at 25, 26. He's only 20. They kept on saying he's 21, but he's 21 at the end of this year, I think, isn't he? So it's December. Yeah. So, he could get to extend his contract for 2 years. 23, he's going to be $1 million plus player who can sign a 10-year deal. He's 23, 24.
But the thing is, I reckon this year they're all going to offer him that now. I mean, yeah,
but there's no rush. You'll get if you want to look at it at market value, 2-3 premierships with maybe a Norm Smith, it's gonna, what price a premiership?
I think it's probably Andy's MFC SS coming to the fore here.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Something terrible is going to happen.
Yeah.
We've got the same situation with Brayshaw as well. And the reality is that the collective bargaining agreement is still in negotiation. That probably won't be sorted out till mid-year at the very best. It has to be sorted out by October, but certainly they'll try to get it in place by the middle of the year, so that all of these various negotiations can be completed. It's not just us. Every club is in exactly the same situation, in that they don't know how much money they've got to spend at the moment. So if you're the manager to Jackson or the manager to Brayshaw, you'd be saying to them, just hang off until we can see how much moola's in the pot, and then we'll go for the maximum amount. You don't want to sign up now, because you might find that there's more available come June or July. Just as equally, you might find that, given the AFL's circumstances from the last 2 years with COVID, there might be less available, in which case it'd be a good idea to sign up pretty quickly. But either way, there is absolutely no point for someone in their position to be signing anything at the moment. Just wait and see what's on the table first, and then it'll happen, I think, pretty quickly. But that won't help Andy in the short term.
And if Tim Lamb is listening, we apologise for any slur on your good name, because he's re-signed Christian Salem, he's re-signed Christian Petracca, he's re-signed Maxi Gawn, I'm guessing. I mean, he's got the runs on the board, so he'll get the job done. Yeah. I think, the central point is he's a star, isn't he? And he's not just a star, he's exactly what, it's crazy to think that only 2 years ago we drafted him. He's exactly what Taylor was saying. You don't let someone like this go. They talk about Curnow being a unicorn. It's like, well, Jackson's a unicorn's a unicorn. He's like, his ability. And as I was saying last week, he turned it on for me with if he starts clunking those marks, and sure enough, he took that, he's big across the chest. He's getting bigger. He gets his ruck craft going. He's going to be, what do you do? I heard Uze this morning on SEN talking about Jackson, and he just sort of made the point that what your point before, Andy, was that it allows Maxi Gawn to be more creative. It gives him other options. I heard Goody say that again. Max said, "Look, he's on fire. Put him, more ruck time." They're going to be very soon, if they're not now, George, 50% ruck time, probably close by the end of the year. I will not be surprised if it's 50-50 ruck time, which gives Gawn so much flexibility. But Uze's point was that his my key takeaway from his comment about Jackson was the thing that marks Jackson out is his ability at the ground level. For a big fella to be able to play almost as a mid, as what Uzo was saying, is that it essentially adds an extra mid whenever he's near the ball, which creates a real problem with oppositions who are trying to use things like outnumbers at the contest, because usually when they think outnumber at the contest, the ruck's not included in that mix. Well, you've got to include Jackson, and often when there's big packs flying, there's two or three bigs. He's both a big who is a legitimate chance at marking it. He's also good enough to, when the ball hits the ground, to pick it up. And the other thing we've talked about Jackson a lot but really that ability to know space around him, George, is really the basketball trait, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Married with ability to put the ball into space for a player to run onto. That's a skill that is very, very hard to teach, and it comes naturally to him. So he's the full package.
George, you want to give us your improvement?
Improvements. A couple of things. I think the goal kicking we've talked about, and as Bin Man said, good goal kicking wins your matches. Before, I'll forgive him this week because of the conditions. People were very, very tired towards the end. We had 3 absolutely, utterly gettable chances in that last quarter, which would have blown the difference out. Instead of being a 2-goal win, it would have been a 5 or a 6-goal win. If those had gone through. Cozzy had one that he would have slotted. Petracca had one as well, and A and B had one on the run from about 25 that he missed. So we'll forgive him for that for this week. It's something that can't continue because we will lose matches if we fail to get them through the majors like we did. We were 10-1 at one point, and even in the third quarter we were 11-2. But then to blow it out to 12-10 probably shows a little bit about the nature of the game, the way it was played. It was very scrappy from that point on in any case. That an area that needs improving. We didn't have the ball in the hands of people like T-Mac and Ben Brown very much in the second half. They're our reliable goal kickers, and thank goodness we had Ben Brown in that first quarter and second quarter particularly. He slotted a couple from the boundary line, which kept us in the right position and got us back in the game in a similar manner to what he did in the grand final. When he's needed, he is a very good kick for goal. But unless they can mark the ball, they don't get those sort of set shot kicks. So, like I said, we'll forgive him this week and have to move on. I hope it's better next time.
Big man, an improvement from you?
Well, I'm going to go to the school of Andy's long bow of definition of improvements. And I know plenty of people disagree with this, but I'll stick to my guns on it anyway, is that I reckon the club can improve with its accuracy of information about injuries and how long we can realistically expect players to come back. Petty, it feels like it was 3 to 4 weeks, it was 4 to 5 weeks ago, about 4 to 5 weeks ago. He's still listed as 3 to 4. Got no sense whatsoever what that means now. And Lever's another one, was on the cusp of playing that week, but the feeling is I wouldn't be surprised if he misses another couple. I know the sort of other side to that discussion is that people feel, well, why should the fans get, why should they know? Well, I'm in the camp that we're the key stakeholders, and the other clubs know probably what's going on. Who are you actually tricking, or not tricking, but what's the, maybe they genuinely don't know. But I said last week, Lever's not going to come back, or Hibbard. Now they're not going to this week either. Goody's already flagged that. So where are they at? Hibbard was a test last week. So is he fit or is he not fit? Same with Lever. How bad's his foot? But Petty, it was good to see footage of him, or at least a photo of him training. Well, where's he at? How long, when they say 3 to 4 weeks, what does that mean? I think for the club has been really brilliant at communicating to the fans the last 2 years, especially all through last year. I couldn't have been happier with their sort of the criticism that I've had in the past was in terms of their media and all of that stuff, and allowing sort of fan access. But it's a continual frustration for me, the uncertainty or the ability to have any confidence in their estimation of players' return. And now I know, it's a bit of a hiding to nothing because who knows, things change. But, I just reckon that personally, I'd like to get some confidence in their estimated timeframes for players coming back. I'm not sure how you fellas feel about that.
Yeah, for me, it's always been frustrating about the injuries that we've been kept in the dark. But I do see from the club's perspective, and do the opposition clubs know? Why give the opposition clubs a leg up? I don't know if it helps them or doesn't. We've come out pretty early in the week and saying that Hibbert and Lever aren't playing. We could have easily have just not said anything and let Essendon keep guessing. But it is frustrating. I know when Petty did his injury and things might have changed, maybe it was worse then, but it was 3 to 4 weeks or 4 to 5 weeks then, and it still is that now. So is it just not healing? Are they not telling us? Was it always going to be 6 to 8 to 10 weeks as it's
Or
going
is there another?
Or is it, has something else come up? Has it not healed well? When Lever did his foot, they said, it's the good whatever he had. It's a good thing. Well, no, because now he's missing extra weeks.
Yeah.
But do you think there's actually been a change in the way that the club is operating because of where we are at the moment? In one sense, the only advantage any other club can gain is not so much whether Lever's on the ground or not, but whether Lever's carrying an injury or not. So when he's not on the ground, he's not on the ground. It's as simple as that. So whether he's not there for 6 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever, the opposition are only in the position where they can play and plan against what's in front of them. Whether Lever can run is more critical to them. But I think what's happened that we really haven't noticed is we've got a really good depth in the club at the moment. There is no need to bring back a Lever.
No. Well,
there's no need to bring back a Hibbert. Now, in years gone by, we were bringing players onto the field and back from injuries as quickly as possible because we simply didn't have the talent and the training and the conditioning into them. Now's the opportunity, as Goodwin said in his interview, it's a long season. It's only round 2. We'd be very grateful if Lever's back by round 4 or 5 and we've got 4 or 5 wins under our belt, and the opposition at that point are going, oh, geez, they're going to get better. They're just bringing back a Jake Lever, or they're bringing back a Christian Salem, because we've taken the time, because we've got that luxury at the moment. We can afford to have people like Bowey and Rivers in the side, and Tomlinson and Smith holding down their positions very, very well. If they weren't, I'll guarantee you Hibbert would have been back, or Lever might have been back.
You're right. I mean, that's I think exactly right, and this gives them an opportunity to do that. And as I said last week, Goody is absolutely wedded to the idea of incumbency. The problem is if you bring Levy back in, you're not going to rest him, and so he's going to stay in. So you're 100% right, but that's a slightly different point as to being sort of, why not then say we're going to give him 3-4 weeks? The opposition, as you say, the opposition in 3-4 weeks' time aren't going to care. It's whether he plays or not in the Thursday night when they're planning. So I just like some clarity. I don't want to be thinking, how long has Petty got? Is it worse than it is? Like, he only got a bad cork. He had to have an operation. All right, well, okay, what's going on here? It could end up being 9-10 weeks that he's missed. I want to have some sense of who I think a key player is, and I just find it frustrating to be sort of guessing all the time. But I get the other side of it. Why should we know? Well, as I say, I think we're key stakeholders. I'd like to know personally.
Look, I think it could be as simple as, like with Lever, that they thought, all right, it's only going to be a week or two, and then he's come to training, still a little bit sore or whatever. Well, we're not going to risk him. We're going to be conservative because they want them to be 100% fit at the pointy end of the season. And in the meantime, we do have the guys like Smith, Tomlinson, Hunt that can easily cover those positions, and we're getting game time into those guys. So if there is injuries mid-year, end-of-year, finals, these guys can slot in, and they've played together. So
of course, they're all benefits. And Yeah, but then just say,
Yeah.
be super conservative and manage expectations. So we're in no rush to get Lever back. We're going to give him full time. And I mean, it's good in some senses also to give them a break from, it's a very short preseason. We've come off our shortest preseason
That's
for,
true
as I
too.
said last week, 57 weeks. So you want to give everyone, particularly the young guys who haven't played, let's use their freshness and whatever. But I see all of that. It's just the communication about the sort of where players are at.
Or you
I've,
can
I've
just
just had.
go ahead, George.
Sorry, I've just had a call from the club. From now on, every injury is going to be 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, well, it is already. That's how it has been for the last 2 years.
You
So
can
what's
last
changed?
2 years, last 20
Yeah.
years. You can just have the sky is falling attitude as I do, and just expect that someone's going to be out for 8 weeks when they get injured.
Well,
And if they come back earlier, bonus.
you would have been better for the club to have called in and say, it's no longer 4 to 6, it's 6 to 8.
Don't do that to me. All right, let's move on. The Casey VFL returned after a long absence, and it's only the VFL competition's only going to benefit us because all these players who aren't going to get a game because of our injuries are in the seniors, are playing in the twos and at least getting some match practice. I was driving back from the Gold Coast since Sunday, so I missed watching Casey's 83-point win over St Kilda's affiliate in Sandringham. I haven't read up that much about the game, and Bin Man, who did watch it, will give us his thoughts in a moment. What I do know is that the 31-year-old veteran Mitch Brown kicked 7 goals, 3 behinds from 14 marks. Our 19-year-old rookie Jacob Van Ruin, in his first hit out for the club, took 8 marks and kicked 3 goals too, while Sam Wiedemann has only kicked 1 goal and taken 6 marks. Other notable stats include ex-Saint Luke Dunstan with 25 possessions, Toby Bedford with 3 goals, and Bailey Laurie, who was drafted alongside rising star Jake Bowey, had 20 possessions and 2 goals. Bin Man, can you fill me in on any other details from that match, and in particular who you were impressed with, who you weren't so impressed with, and so forth?
Yeah, well, just one thing for anyone who's listening who wasn't aware, AFL.com, on AFL.com, all of the VFL matches are now being live streamed with commentary, except for the ones that Channel 7 are covering. I think Channel 7 cover one VFL game of the round or whatever. The rest are all live streamed.
Does that include on demand after the fact, or just while it's happening live?
Actually, I don't know. I haven't checked, but I presume it's on demand, I would have thought. It was single camera live streamed. It was actually terrific. You've heard me bang on about how much I hate the commentary. The commentary was great. It was just the call of the game, very little sort of editorializing. I forget the 2 fellas. One of the guys is Jack, someone who's on SEN, I think, and but a really good call of the game. I'm pretty sure a single camera, but I really enjoyed watching it. We played terrific. I'm not sure. We had 16 AFL listed players in the team, and I think Sandringham only had 3 or 4. So there's a big gulf in talent between the 2 teams. What I find fascinating is they didn't have the opportunity to do this last year with missing so many Casey games, but they're really mirroring the systems they use at Casey for the seniors, and it's really evident what they're doing with that, and both in the way they play, but players mirroring in the Casey team the sort of a analogous role in the seniors. So, for instance, Dorr plays the Max Gawn role. Brown plays the Brown role, which is helpful. Van Ruin, who was terrific, I think he plays the T-Mac compete role, and so on and so forth. And Rosman, to a lesser extent, the sort of running Langdon role, meaning that when there's an injury to a player in the seniors, the player they bring in can both slot into the system, but also has played the specific role that has gone out of the team. And I think we've seen that already with the advantage of that defensive system of players coming into the senior team, knowing their role.
I just want to interject there. In terms of the Casey listed players, do they train with the Demons at all? Or who do they train with?
My sense is no, I don't think they do. They train together, but I think to be honest, it's sort of maybe it's a question for Casey from Casey, but
That'd
I'm
be
pretty sure they don't. And I think there's probably insurance reasons. I'd be guessing for where I don't know, but I'm pretty sure they don't train with Melbourne seniors. But I presume that some of those Melbourne players train with the.
yes, okay.
But it's a good question. It's a really good question. But I've never seen any footage of any of those players.
No,
Um,
neither have I. That's why I wanted to know how it works because they've got to slot in to the way we're playing.
But there were 16 Melbourne players in that team,
Well,
so
that's
there were only
right.
23 playing. So, and so just a few observations. One, it was terrific to watch. We played really well. Again, there was a big golf. Brown was just brilliant. Like he took his chances. I really feel for Weed a bit. He would have been looking up he would have had mixed emotions watching Brown. But to be fair to Wiedemann, he was playing Jackson's role. And so there was sort of that high half forward relief ruckman. So he came in for Dore whenever Dore needed to chop out. And that's a tricky position to play because Jackson's numbers, often he doesn't get high possessions. I think he got 20 plus in this game on the weekend, didn't he? Or perhaps that was the previous week. But, it's a hard position to stay in the game. You're not going to kick as many goals. I think it's a good position for him because I reckon he's a pretty good ruckman. It keeps him around the ball, but it is tricky. He did drop his fair share of marks, I have to say. He didn't clunk them. And if I had a dollar for every time I've heard Wiedemann's in good position, Wiedemann's dropped the ball, I'd be, a wealthy man. But, standouts for me was...
Before you go into standouts with Wiedemann, what's your sense if you're saying there's certain players playing certain roles so that they can slip into the senior team? What if Wiedemann's playing that high half forward Jackson role and relief ruck?
He's covered for Jackson is my take.
Yeah,
he's not coming into the team unless Jackson goes out of the team. If Brown gets injured,
if Brown or T-Mac get injured, who's coming in? Is Wiedemann the next in line? Because Van Rooyen, they're obviously going to keep and keep in the twos and let him sort of build up. But yeah, what's your thoughts?
You probably look. They're probably just in terms of man management. They're likely to bring Wiedemann in if one of those players went out, but they're equally just Brown was in great form. I mean, he's such a clever footballer, Mitch Brown, and he's, every time he's come into the seniors, he's performed, hasn't he? He's never not performed at Melbourne.
I like him. I really like him. Look, I think he's a great sort of backup if we have injuries. I doubt we're winning a premiership with him in there, but I do really like him every time he's come in. He got those votes in the last game of the season in 2020. I like him, and I see what he does in the twos. He can kick bags of goals, but I don't see. I mean, Wiedemann did it once last year, I think, but not seeing enough of that from Wiedemann.
No, I mean, look, the short answer, I think, is if T-Mac went out injured, I think they would still lean towards putting Weed in as much as anything, because what would be the message to him? What message are you sending if he didn't? But look, he didn't have a great game. I think he's got good ruck craft. Van Rooyen looks a ripper, and all of the things, George, that you've criticised Weed over the journey on Van Rooyen is the opposite. He contests. He wants the ball with a passion. He's intense at the, if he doesn't get it, he's going after it again. He's got something about him, that's for sure. And he took some sort of good marks. He's aggressive at the ball. I think Wiedemann's best on the lead, but on the lead in footy is the old school. It's not like Dunstall where you get to run into space. He reminds me of Dunstall. He's great on the lead, but not great so much in a pack. And Van Rooyen looks like he just relishes a pack mark. So the other thing I thought was really curious was Laurie played midfield. Now he was... am I right in thinking he was a halfback flanker as a junior? And my sense was he trained down there, and he was like, him and Bowey were playing a similar role, almost a Salem-style role. But he played almost all of the time that he was on the ground as a midfield. Looked really neat. He was definitely, he played a really strong game. I have to say that the player that I was most impressed with that on a lot of levels, well, maybe not the most, but was impressed with was Melksham. Melksham looked a cut above, which he should be, but his intensity was great. He was clever. He was involved. His body language looked good. He was attacking the footy. I would not be shocked if he gets back in the team sooner rather than later. He 100% looks a cut above VFL level. His kicking was sublime, both on both feet. They really went to town on them in the end. The other player that really jumped out was interesting because there was discussion on Demonland board today about, or perhaps yesterday, that there's some rumour Howe's coming in for, I presume maybe Hunt might come out. I wasn't as impressed with Howes as some people were. Like, he didn't stand out. He's not a player that sort of stands out, but his numbers were pretty good. I think around 20 possessions. So I thought that was an interesting sort of bit of scuttlebutt on Demonland that he might come in. I'd be surprised because I didn't think he set the world on fire, but there was a poster who noted that he was taken off at third quarter and didn't play the last quarter, with a suggestion that was to rest him up for next week. So that's interesting. I thought Dorr was terrific. Dorr, he competes well when his ruck craft is great. He's a real strong competitor. Dunstan was good in terms of his accumulator. He's there. He's playing against a team that he knows, obviously, so he's got a skin in that game against Sandringham. I thought he was strong, and he got stronger as the game progressed. And he had a really solid game. For me, probably he wasn't the best player on the ground, but Mitch Brown was fantastic, obviously. But leaving him aside, I just really like Van Rooyen, the way he attacks the ball, and he looks. It's sad to say. I mean, it wouldn't totally shock me if he ends up in the senior team before Weed does, but he's probably not likely to sort of get in the team this year. Rosman improved a lot in the second half. He was really good. He's got something about him. I love his left foot. They've got 4 or 5 left footers in that Casey team. He had a sort of quiet second half, but really improved in the back half of the sort of second half, in the last quarter in particular, and took mark of the day, took an absolute screamer. So it's fantastic that you can see that. So I'll be interested, Andy. I don't know. I'll check it out after we
check it now. It is the full replay as well, 131 minutes, and also a 5-minute mini match.
Great. That is so good for VFL footy. And as I said, I really enjoyed the coverage. I watched it. Just reminded me you don't really need much complete. I'm pretty sure it's a single camera and maybe a roving camera around the ground. They did a good job, and I enjoyed the game. I thought there was a lot of positives. The biggest positive was that they're playing footy, that Casey team, and you're getting players like the other player who was, a standout was, particularly in the second half, was Bedford. Bedford he went up and he was the Medi sub.
Yep.
They obviously wanted game time, so he's flown back down. I mean, he didn't play, but presumably they would have given him the running. Normally they run the players afterwards to make sure they got some game time in them. I'm not sure if they did. But he played a full game, and he looked a cut above as well. Kicked a couple of really nice goals, really classy, and he ran hard the whole match. So it was really, at first I was a bit confused he was playing because I was thinking he'd played the previous night, but he never got on the ground in the Suns game, did he?
Yeah, but interestingly, Melcham, Dunstan, and I can't remember the third, were also up on the Gold Coast, and they all flew down.
Right. Okay. Yeah, Melcham was, he had the intensity that I've criticised him for not having, and he was really positive. And
Wiedemann was the other one. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
They took 4 players up, and they all flew down on the Sunday, obviously, and played that day.
I think that is a COVID thing, regulation, possibly just to cover your bases.
It's a big call, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a big call.
Fly back in the morning and play in the afternoon, sort of thing.
Casey are going to be very difficult side to beat this year. I mean, particularly if we can sort of stay relatively fit. I mean, I know Sandringham aren't the strongest VFL team, and they've got only, I think they said 4 senior AFL players, but Casey looks strong.
And considering we've got still a few injuries once, Lever here, but all those guys come back. If Smith and Tomlinson go back to the twos,
who's the number 47 for Casey? He's like a long-term Casey player who's been with Casey forever. I just can't.
Mitch White?
No,
Munro.
He's awesome. He's a great player. He's a great old school footballer. And they had another player running around with 70s style long hair who was a Casey player too, who he looked like a avatar, a Gary Baker avatar. So his name escapes me as well, but he was terrific.
All right, let's move on to the ins and outs before we go into that the Bombers match. And do we expect any changes? Goodwin, obviously, we've mentioned, confirmed today. Both Jake Lever and Michael Hibbert are not quite ready to resume playing. So, I mean, we know Goodwin doesn't make changes willy-nilly, but you, Big Man, as you mentioned, you said someone on Demonland suspected Howe might come in for Hunt. So any other changes you would like to see or you think will do? Big Man, I'll start with you. And then
Well, there are two separate posters, RJ and Jaded, both Jaded No More, both flagged sort of implied that they some inside mail about House. I'd personally be surprised because, as I said, he didn't blow me away. But, maybe he's one of those players that you don't notice so much. That
was it inside mail or just because he came off at 3/4 time or whenever he came off?
Someone asked that, and it was a sort of opaque answer from both. So the implication was that a bit of both was the direct answer from Jaded No More for that one. It was a combination of the two, is what she said. So let's say that doesn't happen. I don't see a change, but I guess if I was going to go back to improvements, Hunt had not a great game, did he? And he made some pretty big howlers. He sort of, what you were saying last week, George, he's that sort of some critical turnovers. He had a dead unlucky where he was tripped in the middle of the ground. Yeah. That was unbelievable for a player who was down on his luck. So I'm going with no change. Maybe the Smoky Hunt comes out. Really, who else would come in for him if it's not, like given Laurie's not playing on the halfback flank and seems to be playing in the midfield, it really probably realistically could only be Howes, I would have thought, if Hunt at the moment, if Hibbert's not going to come back, so which seems to be the case. So I'm going no change with an asterisk, maybe Howes for Hunt.
I'd be really surprised in the same way if Howes came in simply because it's his second VFL game. Exactly. You've got to learn the systems and operate with other people the way this team requires you to play in the same way that Smith and Tomlinson did when they were given their opportunities. No matter how well Howe might have played, I just can't see him coming in. Hunt had an absolute horror of a game apart from that which would have been obvious on the television with the turnovers. He was miles off his opponent at times. Lukosius's last goal was absolutely, utterly the responsibility of Hunt. He was 5 metres behind him.
And he lost feel for him, didn't he? That was
you're a defender now, Jayden. You don't allow that to happen. There was only one place that particular ball was going to go, and you're 5 metres away from your opponent. That was, but the problem is, like Bimman just said, who do you bring in? Rivers might have a bit of a question mark over him because of his knee, whether it's been affected even further as a result of that tackle. We don't know, but the fact that they brought Rivers in because they needed him also reinforces the idea. I don't think that Howes will come in at the moment because Goodwin will need to be assured that they're going to do their role and fulfil their role and understand it. So I can't see any change either, really.
The only other player that might fit that criteria, George, who has actually got some time under the belt, not actually many games, but he came in, Deacon Smith, he came in through the rookie draft, didn't he, last year? Or is that am I getting that wrong?
What's the...
or the whatever it's called, that mid-season... Yeah. He played down back and looked pretty comfortable. So, he took a beautiful mark as well. He uses his body well. So he might be a player who could come into that back line potentially.
The difficulty is, as Dazzle Davey 36 pointed out, that people like Rosman and Deacon Smith and Bailey Laurie, they actually didn't play a game last year. It's been 2 years since they played a game of footy.
Well, Deacon, they played a couple in the middle of the year. Deacon Smith played a couple, and
hardly any. And they need to get some. They need to show something at least. And one game isn't enough to start replacing players in the senior side, especially premiership side.
it's possible that, as you said, Howe came off because maybe they knew Rivers might not get up. So
That's actually. I mean, the thing about Hunt is they're asking him to do something different
Yeah.
and which is play one on one this year.
Yeah.
That's not his go to. It's not where he's played off the halfback flank, where his main role has been, as you've pointed out, George, the sort of run, carry, get distance. I think they've given him a job, say, we need you to improve your one-on-one ability. And he had Waitman in round one, and he got found out a couple of times. Locatius a good player, but that was a good example where it was actually didn't swing the game, but it was a pretty critical sort of point in the match. And he looked frustrated as well, honey. And I don't know that he is great one-on-one. Maybe they're wanting him to work on it. I mean, I've got a lot of time for him, so I'm hoping that they just go unchanged. And Rivers is right. So,
all right, let's move on to the actual match. This week we come up against the Bombers, who are 0-2 and having to play the reigning premiers on a Friday night at the G. They're on footy's biggest home and away stage, possibly staring in the face of a third defeat to start the year, where they were the fancy of many pundits, including our own George on the outer. George, do you want to retract your team to watch? And before you do it, on an unrelated note, my team to watch, Carlton, is 2-0. So, George, anything you want to say there?
Yeah, I nothing to say. Simply because I'm always 12 months ahead of the pack. Last year I was betting on Carlton coming good, and it's taken them 12 months, and Essendon are following the same path. So, look, they've got some really talented players available in this side. I'm simply astounded by how badly they've been beaten. It is a characteristic of young sides, but they've looked very, very ordinary in both their games. I'm really surprised given how well they looked towards the end of last year. So they're difficult. They're going to have an even more difficult job to perform this week with Zach Merritt being out. Jake Stringer is being Jake Stringer and just hangs off the back of packs and does nothing seriously to help the team out. It's all about him. When he gets nothing, I watched a bit of the Essendon game this last week, and he just disappeared for whole quarters of the game, just disappeared completely. So the Bomber supporters will be very disappointed in what they expect out of him. So, I don't know what to make of the Bombers. Parrish is performing well, but as someone noted 2 weeks ago, he had 30-odd possessions, of which only 4 resulted in inside 50s. Compare that with what Petracca did on the weekend. There's one damaging player and one who gets lots of touches but doesn't actually hurt you all that much. So I suspect we're going to do win reasonably easy this week. And it's probably going to be another reason why you don't need to bring back Lever and don't need to bring back Hibbert if they're not quite right yet.
Big man, have you been keeping a sharp eye on the Bombers?
Yeah, just before I go into the Bombers a bit, I'm going to totally retract my previews. Is that I predicted you lambasted me for it. The Hawks would be the big slider. You pointed out that I don't have any. Well, I've got football preview dyslexia, and it's a rare condition. So I meant to say they're my big improver, and I was also keen on the Bombers, but I meant to say it's because of my football preview dyslexia that they were going to be the big sliders, the Bombers. So in hindsight, it sounded as if I was wrong, but in fact, because of that condition, I was actually right. So the Bombers are interesting. The reason I did think they were strong, and the same goes for Freo, I was on the back of them copying our defensive systems. And in fact, Carlton are the team who are most looking like Melbourne. If you look at the way they play, it's almost even with Oscar McDonald playing that deep role. They are a carbon copy of the way we go about playing football. As I said last week, a bit more aggressive, a bit more, going through the centre. The thing about the Bombers is that I was bullish about them because of the work they'd put into the defensive system. So for me, the focus has been in the league at the moment you hear it at the moment. It's all the buzzword is territory and pressure and contest. So Collingwood are playing that, and everyone loves them for that. And so that is definitely a big part of our strength. But the big part of our ability, the difference between us and the other teams in the competition is our defensive system, and that's why, as I say, I was bullish about Freo and the Bombers, because I felt that they were implementing a strong defensive system. The thing about that model, as we've talked about any number of times, is that you need all of these other elements to always be brought to you need pressure, you need all players doing the defensive running, you need so many pieces of the puzzle for that system to work. And in the first week, their system completely fell apart. Because they didn't bring any intensity. Their contested ball numbers in that first round were shocking against Geelong, and they duly got smashed. They could not stop momentum at all at any point in that game, and I would put that down to their poor running, but also their defense. Defensive actually just wasn't up to it. Conversely, in this game against Brisbane, they were actually started fantastic. And Uze made the point this morning on SEN that on expected scores, on that champion data expected scores, they actually won that game. Now, he was pointing out the clubs put a bit of stock in that expected scores, but it was all in the first quarter. So they actually had a fantastic first quarter. Could have easily been 5-6 goals up. At the end of the first quarter, Essendon had scored all of its the first quarter goals. So they kicked 4-5 in that first quarter. Really should have been 6 or 7 goals quarter. They were dominant. They smashed Brisbane. They got all of their first quarter goals from turnovers and controlled stoppages. They won the clearance count in that quarter, that first quarter, 11-2, and got 5 of their scores to Brisbane's 0 from clearances. So their system was working in that first quarter. Their defensive system was working in that first quarter. They were, Brisbane are a top 4 team. They're an excellent footy team. They're a team that prides themselves on their ability to win contested ball. They got smashed in that first quarter. So the signs were fantastic for Essendon. Their system was strong. The big concern, if you were an Essendon fan, was what happened afterwards. So, must-win game. They really had to they were in their driver's seat. They arguably could have been 5-6 goals up. They should have been. They didn't take their chances. They missed a lot of easy gets, shots at goal. They, as I say, at the end of the first quarter, they were winning the clearance count by 9, 11-2. So they were smashing Brisbane. They were smashing them in contested ball, which is no mean effort. They ended up losing their contested ball, the clearance count by 10. So from that point on, they went completely backwards. Their system fell apart in terms of their ability to stop the Lions, who in the second quarter just flipped on its head. The Bombers scored just the 1 goal 4, so they missed chances again. And good footy is good kicking. Good kicking is good footy. Brisbane piled on 6 goals 1. So to have a halftime lead, 44-39, and then from that point on, it was. I think the difference between us and all of the other teams, the pack chasing us, is that we don't give up runs of goals. Every other team, including Carlton, if you look at the scores, they're really high at the moment because they're still giving up goals even though they're winning. Same goes for Hawthorn, whose defensive system looks very similar to ours and it is looking great actually after me knocking it, being the reason why I thought they would be so poor. Big concern for Essendon. They scored 6 goals in the third quarter Lions. They just could not stop them scoring. They sort of controlled the game in the end. They scored 15-7 in the end, so it was good kicking. But really, to be 4 goals up at the end of first quarter should have been 6. To lose by what was it in the end? 22 points. Huge concern. Albeit Brisbane are a good footy team, so that first quarter, if they bring that, can sustain it, they'll be in the match. 2 things about the problem. They've got some big problems coming into this match, one of which is their best player, Merritt, is out. So that's a big problem. Interestingly, I don't think they've got good small forwards, and they're as we've talked about, small forwards are the sort of players that really hurt Melbourne. It was a problem for them that Wright was so dominant. Wright was unbelievable in that match, Kerry-like in terms of his numbers. He won't get those sorts of marking numbers against us. I think that he in that first quarter, he had 12 possessions, Peter Wright, took 8 marks and kicked 2 goals. He's not taking 8 marks against us with our defensive system. You take that out of that team, they've lost that game against Brisbane by 7 goals. So it's a big problem for them. I think that they don't match up well with us in terms of that. Big game for them. I read, and I'm not sure if this is true, so this might be an urban myth. They haven't gone down 3-zip at the beginning of the season since 1967. I read. I'd take that with a grain of salt because it was from a quote from Big Footy.
I heard that as well, but it might have been from the same place.
Yeah, so a big game for them. So we can expect them to come out, and the very least they'll come out, and their contested ball will probably be similar to what it was in that first quarter. But they, I don't think they've got I don't think Brisbane have got the same defensive ability as us, so they're not going to be able to jump us in the same way. Merritt's out's huge. I hope that Goody goes to town and tags or puts the cooler is the current phrase that they're throwing around on Parrish and cut him out of the game. Just don't give him anything. I mean, I'll take your point, George, that he gets a lot of easy, these numbers are padded, but if they take him out of the game, they're just not going to get any drive out of the centre. Without Merritt, suddenly their midfield just looks B grade. And I think they're in a bit of struggle town. So, it's a long season. I'm definitely not writing them off yet, but I'm surprised at how ineffective their system has been, but perhaps more surprised by the fact they're not doing the defensive running you need to do to win at sort of the level, certainly not top 4 level anyway.
George, anything else you want to add?
Just to back up what Bin Man said, there was a post from Watson 11 just in the last couple of days who's running a table of percentage of scores from inside 50 defence. At the moment, Essendon's running at 52%. So basically, 1 out of every 2 times you go inside their 50, you're going to score. Whereas Melbourne, it's down to 32%. So that just shows the difference between the two sides. Their defence is absolutely not up to the same standards as what we as the Premiers are.
George, just with that table, if you've got it in front of you, we're number 1 on that, I know, but what's the next? Who's number 2? Between us,
I'd have to bring it up. I haven't got it in front of me. I just picked that out for this game.
And for a team that defensive system was modelled on Melbourne, 52% is not going to cut it, is it?
No, and I think they were bottom or second bottom on the table, just purely from memory. But half the time you go in there, you're going to score. Yeah.
And as we've talked about, what that points to is not necessarily a poor defence. It points to your midfields and your half-back flankers and your half-forward flankers not doing enough running. That's where you get a blowout like that number.
All right. It's going to be a big game on Friday night. It's our home game, so everyone get down there and support.
I'll be there, Andy. I'll be there.
You're finally going to get to a game this year. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's good to be back at the footy. You'll have a very sore throat, hopefully not from COVID, after the game, I can assure you.
I'm not seeing another human between now and Friday. That's going to be my strategy.
Go into isolation. All right, let's move on to for the last point of business. Our AFLW, our women's team, is playing in a preliminary final on Saturday at the MCG for our first match on the hallowed turf at 12:40 p.m. against the Brisbane Lions. We've had some close games against the Lions in our past 2 outings, with both decided by under a kick, I believe. George, do you expect a similar hard-fought, close game?
I think I absolutely agree that it will be. You've got the current premiers playing on one side of the ground, and Melbourne challenging for that position. There's a lot at stake. Whoever wins this obviously is into the grand final. Let's hope that Adelaide slip on the other side, because that will actually give us the potential to actually play a home final here in Melbourne. But that depends on the results of not only this match but the other one. we're in a very good position. I saw the injury list tonight. There's 2 players who are on that who basically haven't played all season. So we've got a full list to choose from coming into this game. Sounds a bit familiar to another team that won a premiership recently.
That's 2-week break as well, George.
Sorry? And
a 2-week break as well.
Yeah, and I think that's why the injury list is so low that Eden Zanka, for example, had a quad injury. Well, she's recovered from that, and she's a big necessary in the middle of the ground. But, yeah, for the girls in particular, that 2-week break would be very, very advantageous. It's a bruising sport. That gives them the time to refresh and get their bodies back. They're not full-time at this game, so having a full list basically is the best possible advantage, best possible position that we'll be in at this time of the year. So I'll be there. I hope there are plenty of other people to cheer them on. Brisbane are a very good side, and that's why they're back in the preliminary again this year.
And isn't it just awesome that it's going to be at the G?
Yeah,
that's fantastic. And the weather's 21 degrees.
Yeah.
Just maybe 1 or 2 showers. They should be perfect for footy.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I encourage everyone to get down there, support the girls, and let's hope we can get into a grand final. Have they indicated where, if Adelaide do fall over and we do get a home final, is it likely to be at the G? George, have you heard any rumors?
I don't know. It depends. Well, look, the AFL was prepared to push. Who else are playing on Saturday?
Is Collingwood Geelong at night.
Yeah, and I think they pushed that game back. It was originally slated for the afternoon in order to accommodate the AFLW game. So, so that's a good sign for the future. But they're not going to make decisions about that until they see the results of these 2 games.
And I read, George, that only 2 players in the Melbourne team have played on the MCG, and it was in an exhibition game, one of those exhibition games against the Bullies, I presume.
Yeah, that would be Daisy and Taylor, and they were magnificent that day.
Yeah, yeah.
I've just looked at the next week. There's also a game. There's no game during the day at the MCG. There's a Marvel Stadium game in the afternoon at Collingwood's playing West Coast, and then the G at night is Richmond. The Richmond Bulldogs at 7:25, which is like the Collingwood Geelong game on the Saturday night this week. So it's very possible.
It's a possible.
That game could be at the G, providing Adelaide don't win their preliminary final to get the home final.
Yeah. I heard Daisy on SEN talking about the match, and she was buzzing about the fact it was at the G. It's terrific. So I'm going to try and get down there, George. Got to square away a few things on Friday night, but yeah, it's a big opportunity for us to get to a grand final. And with Daisy, sort of the question she was asked is, with the next season starting in August, do you go again? Because before you know it, it'll be the start round 1 of 2022-23 season.
Exciting times. All right, boys. I think we'll wrap it up there. Exciting times. Back at the G on a Friday night. It's good to get these prime time slots. We've got to soak it up while we've got them. All right, we'll be back next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Legs.